Rachel here. Welcome to my SlowTVStitchery. Well, hello again. This is, I think, the last of the felt work pieces that I have to do. And I'm actually not entirely convinced that I've finished it, which is tricky. I am sufficiently convinced to think that any details that I will choose to add will be very small details that I can add on the surface of the stitching, and I don't need access to the back. So I'm going to mount it and see where I go from there. It's actually better than I remembered it, which is gratifying. So my first task is to make an uneven edge. The shears might be quite noisy, so I might switch off the filming for that. And then I sit down and stitch. So I didn't quite get his paws level, which is awkward. And these may be a little dicey. We will see how I get along. I am, of course, much too fond of my little cat to damage him, so these are infeasibly well preserved fragments, but nothing about any of my Dreams of Amana pieces is entirely straightforward, so I think I just have to hope that everyone enjoys them with me. So I'm quite pleased with this. It has actually transformed it, which is astonishing, but very gratifying. You never quite know how well something's going to work, and it's now then it has transformed it, but it's a very crisp edge, so I think, let's see, oh, there we are. I need at some point to make my peace with my grandmama's curved needles, because I think I'm going to need them to work the to attach the Amana family. It's a little bit easier with the felted pieces, because if I become anxious about the fitting, the attachment, I can very lightly felt everything in, as long as I am careful about where I attach it. But dealing with the gold work is going to be a different matter altogether. And I'm not quite sure how to pull that off yet. Once I've done that, I will have no more excuses, and I will have to start tackling the more difficult pieces, Nefertiti and Akhenaten, the individual pieces, and even more the pieces that started this all. Remember, I never intended to come up with anything quite so extensive. It was going to be little patches attached to two big pieces, and somehow the project sort of grew. I think I mentioned before that the Amana project became subject to what my software engineer friends refer to as feature creep. So when I have finished attaching this, I might have to tidy up some of the edges a little, because the ragginess induced with scrabbling with a needle is maybe not quite the right ragginess, but this is actually working, I think. Try. Not always the most comfortable poses required for doing this. Kneeling at Grandmama's sewing table. So many of the techniques I've ended up using in Amana I hadn't even heard of when I started. I knew about needle felting as an industrial technique, but the things that artists could do with it had not impinged on my consciousness, as my dad would say. and the idea of creating wooden frescoes, well, I suppose it is a natural outgrowth from the idea of a tapestry, which is after all basically woven wallpaper. Although I think what people don't necessarily realise without thinking about it is that tapestries would change the acoustics of the room, as well as the appearance of the room, as well as probably the temperature. Probably be ever so much warmer in a room with tapestries in. And there was apparently a report, I haven't seen it, but my husband did, as concert halls began to open up again, in order to reduce the number of extraneous staff, one of the concert halls closed its cloakroom, so all the patrons had their coats bundled up under their seats, and it actually ruined the acoustic because there was too much absorption going on. Having discovered when we moved into our house that the lovely woodblock floor in the dining room was having a most dispiriting effect, and I got a raging headache every dinner, and I came to the conclusion that every time that the lovely woodblock floor was creating an echo, so had to put a rug down. That was one of the reasons we bought the house. We had to hide it. Hey ho. So if you've been watching these videos from the beginning, you might remember that one of the ideas I had was just for an adventure, was to go pony trekking from Lindisfarne to Yevering. And I've actually contacted a couple of places that do something a bit like that, or at least they say they do pony trekking, but not quite what I'm looking for. They were certainly bewildered by the idea of an excursion with a tame historian. However, it has also occurred to me, partly because one of my correspondents said that turns out she's allergic to ponies, or horses, and lovely though the idea was, she would want to be in the support vehicle. So then I thought, I don't actually know how well I would get on with pony tracking. It might be a good idea to try an afternoon and see how I get along with that. So I am hoping later in the spring. There are a couple of places fairly nearby that do an afternoon pony trekking. If I can give that a go, see how well I get along with the experience. One of the reasons for doing that rather than walking is the extra view of the countryside you get from above head height. And never having been a rider, I don't know whether I would like it. Years ago we were in London and in Windsor, had a stroll in Windsor Great Park, and it occurred to me then that although it's lovely to walk in the park, you would get a different view from horseback, and it's been something that's been in the back of my mind for donkey's years now, as something that would potentially change one's view of the landscape. So, yes, an experiment to perform, and if that turns out well, I will see how to organise such a thing. To create slightly jaggier feel in places here. I have tended with all of the Amana pieces. All of what I do is handmade, and if I wanted machine organized perfection, I would use machines. When I am trying to create these sorts of raggy, uneven effects, I want to stitch fairly evenly to ensure that the fabric is held down reliably. But then at the same time, I want to create something which is vaguely reminiscent, shall we say, of fragments of frescoes. We are not looking for to use a phrase from Terry Pratchett's Dwarfs, the thing and the whole of the thing. We are looking for 3 or 4 layers back of recollection. As much as anything, the felt pieces happened because I had acquired a needle felting machine and was intrigued to see what I could do with it. And it was obviously going to be something inspired by Amana, because that was where my mind was at the time. I'm sure that had I been working on Placidus or the Golden Fleece or Manawatu Gorge, that's what I would have ended up doing. Now I come to think of it, I may yet. It's certainly a useful way of creating, well, actually, something as accurate as you like. I have seen a needle felted pipistrelle which was so realistic looking that I found myself hoping that the person in whose hands it was actually licensed to handle wild animals. And then I reminded myself it was a bit of felt and licensing didn't come into it.
That's all for this session. I hope you enjoyed following along. Happy stitching!